This podcast is for educational and entertainment purposes only. Nothing stated on it, either by its hosts or any guests, is to be construed as psychological, medical, or legal advice. You are listening to Adoptees On, the podcast where adoptees discuss the adoption experience. I'm Haley Radke. Sara Easterly is back with us. She's the author of Searching for Mom and the founder of Adoptee Voices. Today, we're talking about how Sara became friends with an adoptive mother and a birth mother in order to write a book called Adoption Unfiltered. It's a hard conversation because when I got asked to endorse this book, I had to say no to a friend who I value and deeply appreciate for her contributions to the adoptee community. So we got together to talk about it. We address the power dynamics when interacting with adoptive parents. We talk about whether or not adoption really is always going to be around, and what adoptive parents need to be doing now that they know that they participated in a terrible system. Before we get started, I want to tell you I have a puppy, and you might hear little puppy snores in the background. So I'm excited, but you may hear him showing up from time to time. And if you want to see him, he's on my Haley Radke Instagram. He'll probably be on the Adoptees On Instagram stories too. Anyway, he's a very cute little pug named Spencer. And sorry about the snuffles, but he's sleeping right here. I also wanted to invite you to join our Patreon adoptee community today over on adopteeson.com/community, which helps support you and also the show to support more adoptees around the world. We wrap up with some recommended resources, and as always, links to everything we'll be talking about today are on the website adopteeson.com. Let's listen in. I'm so pleased to welcome back to Adoptees On, Sara Easterly. Welcome, Sara.
Thank you, Haley. I'm so glad to be back here again.
I love seeing your face. This is your fourth time on the show, I think.
It is, yeah. Although one was with my Adoptee Voices crew.
Yes, it still counts.
It counts, yeah.
We'll link to all of your previous appearances on the show in the show notes for folks. But if they want to go back to 143, that's when you really share your full story. And we talk about your memoir, Searching for Mom. And that was in 2020. And we're like reflecting on like, oh, it's pandemic times and we're both scattered. And I'm coming to you today with a new puppy, very tired. So also feeling a little bit. It's like, when does Sara get my best? I don't know.
Well, you're at your best all the time, even through all the chaos. So.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
That's what I believe.
So we're fellow adoptees, of course, and you have a book that is now out called Adoption Unfiltered. And two of your co-authors have a very different adoption experience than you. Can you talk about that and how you guys came to connect and be friends and do the work you're doing together?
Yes, I'm happy to. And I appreciate you having me on to talk about it. Just want to say that. Thank you so much. So I met Lori in January of 2020 when I was in Denver for a book event for Searching for Mom. And she attended and introduced herself to me. And that was lovely. We even took a picture together. And, I met lots of people. And many of whom I actually still have relationships with today, which is fantastic. Just a nod to in-person events and how those things go. And I ended up doing a little bit of writing for Lori on her blog. She often and she still does, working to elevate adoptee voices. So having adoptees write on her blog. And I pitched a couple of things to her and she took them and posted them. And
this is Lori Holden, who is an adoptive mother.
Thank you for the background. Yes. And so we just built an online relationship. And it was later in that year, I remember seeing, as you and I both know, Haley, just there can be some contention in these spaces when you're out there in adoption advocacy work.
Uh-huh.
And she was taking some heat. And I just because I had a relationship with her, I reached out and just said, "Hey, are you okay?"
Oh,
It was, I don't even remember the exact details around it, but it was really like I felt just harsh reaction, the kind of thing someone wouldn't say in person, as happens all the time online. And we ended up hopping on the phone together, and we were like, why is it so hard to talk to each other? And we keep getting misunderstood. And we kept having these realizations in this conversation. And I think I just kind of cheekily said, we should write a book together. And she's like, okay. And it's one of those things you put out there, and we put it out there. And then we were like, well, we want a birth parent, and who would that be? And we just kind of had this conversation going for maybe 2 months. And then we were both at a conference. We didn't even know, like, we weren't really close friends still. This was just kind of those things you say. And then we were both at an online conference again because the pandemic, and we saw Kelsey presenting. I saw that Lori was there, and I chatted her, hey, hey, hi, good to see you. And then we were both in a presentation that Kelsey Vandervliet Ranyard was presenting. And Lori and I both chatted each other, the birth mom we want, because she was so articulate. And so she'd been doing work. She'd been looking at adoption in a really great, deep way that struck us both immediately. And I already knew that Lori had been for many, many years. She way preceded me to the adoption advocacy spaces. And so we just reached out to Kelsey, and she did not even know who we were. And she said, yes, I'll write a book, basically, sure. And then the next thing you know, we were meeting weekly and it took us, that was January 2021. So a year after Lori and I met. And then it took us another few months to figure out, like, what are we going to do together? What would a book look like? And start envisioning it. We did some practice writing together. We took some heat for some of the things some things we wrote. And so we learned from that of, okay, how does this work with communicating between the three of us, as a team, as co-writers, and then so that people can hear what we're trying to say and that we can get points across, and hopefully by this unique configuration model, what it's like to work together across aisles, to take advantage of power dynamics and educate in a different way. So it took another year, basically, like that. We started in January 2021, and we weren't even ready for the book to be out there pitched for another year. So it took a full calendar year. By December, I think, was when October, November, December. I'm trying to remember exactly, but when we finally were getting it out, and then we got the book contract, we got an agent, we got a book contract, and then I had to write the book, and and now it's out as of December 1st.
out in the world. So, I only talk to adoptees, and occasionally I'll talk with first parents. And I have a really hard time engaging with adoptive parents because most of the engagement I get from adoptive parents is trying to correct me. And I don't appreciate that. And it's hard for me to dialogue with folks who are not able to listen and understand my perspective, especially because I'm a grown adult and I've been doing this for a long time now. And we were just kind of joking before we got on, like, how many hundreds of adoptees, right? Well, both of us have spoken with over the years. And so it's like, I don't think you're going to change my perspective at this point. And what's the point of me trying to change theirs, How has it been navigating these relationships with Lori and Kelsey? Like, you guys getting along all the time? What's going on there? That sounds hard to me.
I'm so glad you asked this question. Yeah. I mean, I am so lucky. I mean, the three of us were just talking yesterday because, we really didn't know each other that well. And we, you just don't know, and we feel like we each, I think, feel really lucky for the ways, the people that we are, because I've never felt like Lori or Kelsey have ever tried to talk me out of anything or tried to change my mind. I'm just really lucky. And I know exactly the people you're talking about, because I've had them in my DMs or a Facebook post or whatever, and, or in conversations. And it's so activating. And I feel really thankful that's not what happens. They're both really good about centering adoptees. They're both really great about not asking me to do emotional labor for their personal situations. We never really had to say, here's my boundary and you can't cross it, because they already had an awareness about that, because they were already in these spaces for so long that they'd done enough work to know this is how you do and don't interact with an adoptee and a fellow human being. Some of the way people interact, it's kind of to the point I was saying earlier, when I felt bad for Lori, it's like, I feel bad for you, Haley, for the stuff that people drop in, because they wouldn't say that. Maybe some of them would say it to your face. As it's coming out, I'm like, no, I've had that.
You know what? I would love that. That would be really interesting.
Yeah.
Get to know who I really am if they said it to my face. Yeah. Okay.
But all that being said, I mean, we've had some hard things. It's been hard. Like it's not like super easy. We've had some challenges to work through.
Can you tell me one topic that was super challenging and that you guys butted heads on?
Well, I can tell you one topic in the book, and then I can also tell you one just way of working together.
Okay.
But the topic that was challenging was on attachment. And Lori had written a chapter on attachment. And of course, I say, of course, the listener hasn't read my book yet. So, but my whole kind of focus of study since becoming a parent and since looking at my own adoption is all about attachment, and looking at attachment and studying attachment dynamics and how we relate to as people, how we love, how we grow, how we trust, how vulnerability affects us, and our emotional responses to separation. And so that is my entire section is about attachment, minus my chapters on classism and racism and religion. But everything else is all about attachment. And so Lori had a chapter on attachment, and she hadn't read yet my chapters, and because we had different working styles. And so my work style is to wait until the deadline's right in front of me. And then with that pressure, I will write. And Lori, we found out, has a different style where she was drafting. She had, I think, all of the framework for all of her chapters drafted before Kelsey and I had even started. So
that's unrelatable. I don't understand that either. Sarah, this is how I work like you work. There you go.
And Kelsey does too. So what was so interesting about this whole thing, there's so much I could talk about just on that whole thing alone too, because you've got the adoptive parent as the adoptive parent already drafted. And she's waiting on me for my feedback, but I can't give feedback to her because I need to get my own thoughts out before I'm looking at her content, because I don't want that influencing me. And so there was that whole dynamic at play. And then when I turned my head to look at it, I'm like, well, wait a minute, like this doesn't make sense for you to have a chapter on attachment when everything I'm going to write is about attachment. And what you're saying about attachment is kind of different from my view of attachment. And I see what she was doing, but I have a different perspective. And so that was our first interaction with collaborating in our writing. And I read it, and I got to tell you, I didn't react in a way that was like real attachment friendly. I sent this long email and I was like, I disagree with this. I disagree with this. I disagree with this. I had red lines all over. And I said, in fact, I feel so strongly about this. If this stays in the book, I can't be a part of it. So it was kind of like that adoptee, it was my adoptee, like I see the exit doors and I'm out, like, and I also felt really strong. I also knew, like, I have a pretty clear boundary on that, like that I was like, I see that I have some feelings here. So I sent the email, and it was wounding. And for a couple of days, Lori did. I feel very comfortable saying this because we talk about this all the time with each other. But Lori did respond in a way that was kind of unkind. She sent a note and it wasn't kind, her response. And I didn't say anything. We let the weekend go. And then we scheduled time. We both came back on Monday and talked because we're both really committed to the project ultimately. And we came back and we had a phone call and we heard each other. And I think we both saw how our own adoption related dynamics were at play there and we could talk about it. She's like, I'm really sorry. I never should have said that to you. And it wasn't like it was, I'll just say it. I don't think she would have a problem with me saying it. I think she said something about, and you're right, you're the expert on attachment.
Oh,
it wasn't, those are not her exact words.
Actually I am. But just, yeah.
No, I'm not, clearly. Threatening. Yeah, it doesn't come alongside you at all. So it was funny. We learned from it. And then we also learned about our working styles. And I learned I can say that now, but at the time I didn't have the insight to be like, I need to get my stuff out on paper before you do it. And I'm sorry. I can see how that's really frustrating for you because you've got all this energy and organization and it's not fair, but I got to write my stuff first and then you can respond and go after me. And so it did light a fire for me. Okay. I can't wait until the very last deadline here because I've got colleagues and we have a process we need to go through. And then the other piece of that was that other big aha for us was we're writing about coming together and we were off in our own silos writing. And we thought we would just dump it all together. And then it was we have to actually do what we're saying we have to do. We have to go back and forth. We have to bounce off of each other's words. This isn't just, we all go in our corners and write the book and just place it in. It's not going to work that way.
Mm-hmm. So one of the things that I bumped up against when I was reading, it wasn't quite the final, I guess. You asked me if I would endorse the book. And this is a long time ago. And I was like, sure. And so I read a giant chunk of the adoptee section, which was first. Good job. And then I was flipping through towards the end, knowing that I'm going to come up to the adoptive parent section in particular. And I saw some of the chapter titles and things. And I was like, oh my gosh, I don't think I can read this. It really felt activated. And then I was like, I can't finish reading this. And I have a rule that I only endorse things that I've fully read and actually want to endorse. And I had to email you and tell you I couldn't do it. And I felt so bad, Sarah, because we've had a really good connection all these years. And I'm gonna cry just thinking about it. But my dog died. You were one of the people that sent me this really thoughtful gift. And I still have your card on my wall. I can see it from here, And I know how much work you've done for adoptees and helping them unlock their writing and through your writing classes and all of those things, right? So I was like, oh my God, I'm really going to let her down, but I can't do it. It was so scary to send that email to you.
I appreciate you saying that. I knew that. When I got the email from you, that was my first thought is, oh, I hope I didn't put her, I felt bad because I was like, oh, I just figured I know you. And I know that it would have been really hard to write. And I think you even said that in your note. It was a lovely note. And I totally understood. And I want you to know, I feel like I'm going to cry too. I am so thankful. And so are Kelsey and Lori that you spoke up because it was a really key moment in the development of this book because, they go through so many drafts and you get to a point where you're like, I'm sick of this book. It's done. And there were some things that I know were not really working. And a part of me was like, an editor's going to fix this. Our editor will get this, like we'll get this down the road. And then it didn't happen. And a part of that, I think it's an important part of the conversation that I'm just going to flag for maybe later, is when you're publishing traditionally, editors don't always, they're not adoption fluent. So only in here can we do this. So what your feedback was a pure gift. I have goosebumps, truly, because we realized that we have this book title and this idealistic vision of unfiltering adoption, and not, and bringing out into the open the things that have been swept under the rug and not addressed, or we gloss over and pretend there's no loss and pretend all these things. And that works for adoptees and for birth parents. We think it does. And then we realized, wait, adoptive parents are the ones who've been in power. And we can't have the full unfiltered perspective if we want everybody to read this. That's a different book. Like this book, we're trying to reach all the audiences. And so we do need to be like really aware of those power dynamics and how it affects every reader. And your honesty meant so much. And by the way, if it also makes you feel better, you weren't alone, because I had a second adoptee come forward, and someone I'm very close with and a mentor, and said the same thing. So I was like, okay. And, in writing groups, they always tell you, if you're in a writing group and you're getting feedback, if you get something critical from one person, you can decide what you're going to do. You do or don't have to listen to that. But if you get two or more and they're saying the same things, you have to listen. And so you and the other, I was like, I've been in writing groups for 20 some years. So I knew exactly this is what this is. It's this. And I had been hoping it would get fixed and kind of just ready to be done with it. And it's like, nope, we're not done yet. Go back in, and we've got to pick this apart and figure out what is palatable. And I know it's not the same thing at all, but when you make the metaphor of race, so it's easier to see. Like we would never expect people of color to listen to all the backstory of why white people are racist, a racist, something hurtful that we did out of our unconscious or conscious racism. And so it's the same dynamic. We were like, okay, that we can't, that chapter on baby fever, I think may have been that was a title that was in there. It's gone. That chapter is gone. But we don't need to understand that. Adoptive parents can have their spaces for that. And I think I will say, that was good for me too, because I think just I had the luxury of 3 years in relationship with Lori and Kelsey, and I know their full work, and I know the end. Like for Lori, I know her character arc, that yes, she started with baby fever, and she has modeled a different way. And that was what she was trying to do with that chapter, is model how to get past that and not have that mindset, and model for hopefully prospective adoptive parents, not to get myopic on baby fever, and that it is too uncomfortable. We don't need, that's not the point of really what we're trying to do in the book, is unfilter everything. There's still a place for some filters. And you got it, Haley.
Well, I have read it in full, the new version that everyone else is going to be able to read. And I did get through it, and I didn't feel activated. Of course, I was reading with a different lens this time, with the purpose of us having this conversation. And I really appreciated, well, first of all, we already talked about this, having the adoptees be the first voice in the book, and your really cool diagram of the adoption constellation with the adoptees at the center. And it actually looks like, I just was at this event. It's like a Canadian adoption event thing, and they call it the galaxy instead of the constellation. And I was like, oh yeah, okay.
Into that. Yeah.
Yeah. So I could see both of those in the diagram. So when I was reading through at the end, I thought, okay, this book still isn't necessarily for someone with the full lens of full family preservation. I was going to say at all costs. It's not that, but like there is a line I think that is in your section where it's like adoption is still going to be a thing. And there's many of us who really fully believe that abolition is possible. And there is a different way to call it permanency, I guess, give kids permanency who are unsafe. And we know that is a very, very, very small minority of what we're talking about in adoption with permanent legal guardianship or those kinds of things. And so coming to it with that and thinking of how Lori does work with adoptive parents and Kelsey is working in the adoption field still, these are things that I thought, oh, okay, that's hard for me. That's hard for me to see adoption still, what do I say, perpetuated, I guess. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, what we say, and I'm sure you read this, but what we say is if you, the reader, are adoption is love, it's beautiful, or if you're on the other side of that, adoption has to be abolished, then it probably isn't the book for you. You're right. I mean, it may not be. And that's okay. I mean, I think every book has its market and its audience, and that's okay. We are not pro-adoption in the book. It's not like we're adopt. And I want to say Kelsey does tremendous work. Her work in adoption is all advocacy. She just was presenting to the House of Representatives last week, and it's all for stopping harmful practices in private adoption and getting regulation. So it's not that she's out there, when she's working, the ways she's working in adoption are for the good and for the better. Now, I will say I have my own mixed feelings, and I think I've had some conversations with one of my interviewees, and lately just, we were just talking. I mean, it's anytime, I mean, this is my second book on adoption, and this one's more of a teaching, educating book than, of course, my own story, but my writing and my essays are all trying to teach. And, then what is I think there's a real philosophical question of that I like talking about and thinking about and having in the back of my mind, because are we teaching so much that we're now saying, okay, do X, Y, Z, and now you get to go forth and do adoption, and that's not my vision. I really appreciated Lori interviewing two people who decided not to adopt.
Yes.
And why they decided not to adopt. And I have a little bit of a part of me is like, I hope we can get prospective adoptive parents to read this book. And maybe we will talk people out of adopting. And I don't know about you, Haley, but I have had friends who struggled with infertility, and they've said, I really appreciate your work because I'm not going to pursue adoption. And I'm like, wow, I thank you, because, and if you do still, then you got to have your eyes wide open and not think this is just your answer to your prayers, and so it's important to me to tell the truth for that reason. But I wear that, I keep that in mind, and it's complicated. It's complicated for me. I still want to teach. There are still adoptees out there who need support, who are being raised by parents who need to know how to raise and better support those children. And there are birth parents who need to do a better job of stepping up and supporting their kids in different ways. And I really appreciate the ways that Kelsey models that in her section of recognizing that you might have legally signed your rights away, but you are still a parent. And I love that she models that for other birth parents to see that. The other piece that I want to say that's complex of the whole thing, and this is another thing I really value about Kelsey, is because her adoption took place only 7 years ago, she has and because of the advocacy work she does, she's very well versed in what's happening today in adoption. And I think a lot of us, and myself included, we are basing what we know on adoption of our experience of whatever era our adoption took place. And the landscape is changing. And I think when I look at it from the decades, I see how it's kind of the same theme over and over again. When you read The Search for Anna Fisher, it's like, what? Like, I thought this was all fresh, but that was in the 70s. And so there's a lot of the same undercurrents, but things are changing. And so I think it's really important for us to know that and be aware of how it's changing and why, and then to be able to kind of fill in the pieces now to apply with what's going on. So that definitely informs my perspective, and all those things are at play. And it's adoption, right? We live with complexity and not ever fully reconciling everything to this nice, tidy package. And I think that is a strong suit of adoptees, right? We can live in those things that are both.
Yes, live in the middle. Okay, I appreciate those things. I want to touch on a couple. First, let's talk about openness in adoption. I told you I was just at this event, and one of the people that I connected with told me they had just finished this research comparing adoptees who experience closed adoptions with adoptees who've experienced open adoptions, because now, right, those folks are becoming adults, and we can look at their experiences, and they've had the decades, and comparing their, say, psychological outcomes and if there was a difference or benefit. And her research lines up with what I've heard anecdotally, is that adoptees from open adoptions, in whatever capacity openness means, from a full connected relationship ongoing with one or both of their biological parents, they still have the same issues that the closed adoptees have. So I think there's this idea that we're doing all these things so differently, and openness is really the fix. And that's the one thing that was missing, that I'm going to have to just roll my eyes at when folks say that. Cause I'm like, okay, but have you talked to adoptees that have experienced that? Cause that's not their experience. Maybe some, but not my friends. And I liked how Lori laid out some of the, what does openness mean, right? Does that mean a postcard once a year versus a full relationship, and having your adopted child go for full visit with bio parents without them there, and those kinds of things. So yeah, you have any comments on that piece of it? I mean, this is what we hear, right? It's the fix. Open is the fix.
Yeah, we hear it. Yeah. And it is so great that we're starting to get research, and that those adoptees from that era are growing up. They're adults. They can say, wait a minute. Yeah. And because it wasn't the fixed end all be all. And I mean, it kind of gets to what I was saying earlier too, just even for adoptive parents to have knowledge of attachment and what happens to us, that's not the end all be all either. There's still going to be pain and hardship and loss. You cannot get around that. There is loss in adoption, open or not. We can make it easier for the adoptees. And I think I would have loved, when I read Lori's section on openness, I love that, because there's that part of me that was like, oh, I wish I had grown up with openness, even if it wasn't an open adoption. Well, of course, but I would have loved to have openness where I could just talk about adoption and how I felt openly. And, anything, the other piece of that too, that I wonder about as a thought that I think about often is, what's it going to be like another 20 years from now when today's adoptees are grown up? Will they feel like all my parents would do was talk about adoption, because there was so much openness? I don't know. Either way, I don't think there's no quick solutions. Adoption can't have a quick solution. I think that's the that for me was the challenge of writing this book too. I was like, anyone who's not an adoptee reading this is going to feel so hopeless when finish my section because that is one of my key points. You can't fix it.
Mm-hmm.
You can't.
Mm-hmm.
You can understand better, but you can't fix it. And I think that was the trap that people fell into with open adoption, is thinking this is going to make it.
Yeah.
And it didn't.
I mean, I was at a conference last year, the year before, and one of the keynotes was like one of the pioneers of open adoption. And the way she talked about it, because she'd been in adoption for years, like working in adopt, and the way she talked about it, I was like, oh my gosh, you don't have a clue. You don't have a clue. Like, and you're a keynote speaker. What is happening? So I mean, that's one of the great things about your book, right? Is you're really saying the hard things. Like, if there's a book about adoption that's all positive and is purporting to have the solution, like, it's not real.
Yeah. Yeah.
Those, like, these are the real conversations, like the ones we're having now that you guys talk about, right? Like in the book, like you're like, look, we've been glossing over this for so long. I think I even wrote down on page 18, there's a quote from you: putting a happy face on adoption doesn't serve anyone, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, yeah, exactly.
I've been really lucky. I've been this happened almost shortly after Kelsey and Lori and I embarked on this book project. I joined Adoption Mosaic's Better Together group, and it's a group with adoptees and adoptive parents and a birth parent. I think we only have one birth parent right now. And I've been in this group the entire time. And there are a lot of different kinds of adoptions, and the adoptive parents are actively parenting right now. And I see it really helped inform for me a lot of remembering to see this, that open adoption is not the end all be all, because I see the complexity. I hear when you talk with even the parents, it's really complex for them too, and you put yourself in those shoes. If I was well aware that my birth mother had 3 children when I was younger, even as an adult in reunion, that can be hard for me. I feel even as an adult, I'm 51, I feel there's jealousy or there's hurt that why did she keep them and not me? And so, and to put that, like a child growing up, seeing that, and that's really complicated to navigate for parents and the children alike. So yeah, I mean, I think in some ways, maybe it even adds complexity. Not that I'm saying don't do that either, but it's just, everything's complex. There's no way around the complexity and the loss.
No, there isn't. Okay. I want to make sure we touch on the Kelsey section and the birth parent section. One of the stories of one of the moms that she interviewed talks about how she wasn't getting into trouble until after she had placed her child. And I think that was one of the key moments for me. I'm like, yeah, like, the trauma of placing your child for adoption, even if it's in an open adoption, even if you sort of have some idea of what's going to happen to your child, like, that can be just full of so much brokenness. And I think that the stereotype is that the birth parent is already having these sorts of issues, which is what led to this unexpected pregnancy. Can you talk about some of your insights and things that you know now about the birth parent experience from your relationship with Kelsey over these last few years?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of how I can do this, because I don't want to, I so badly want to talk and tell you all the things she said, but I learned so much from her section. There's so much that heals and informs my own relationship and the way I view my own birth mother, because there's understanding. It's the good and the hard of working across across the lines with both, I will say, because you kind of are aware of your loss in a way too, when you're like, oh, look at her, like doing her work and and understanding the impact, and that can be painful. So there's the grieving that I have to do in that, and the yearning that someday, I might encourage those people in my closest circles to dive deeper and look a little closer. So there's that. But there's the healing in that too. There's the healing in even knowing that grief is there, because I might not have even paid attention to that before. It brings it to consciousness. And then there's just the understanding and the compassion that I can offer. And it's beautiful and it's heartbreaking. It's all those things at the same time. Again, the dualities that we have to sit with all those things. But I've learned a lot, and I've been able to put myself in Kelsey's position in a lot of ways too, just as a young woman. And I had an unplanned pregnancy myself, and I went a different direction, and I could have gone, that could have been my situation. So there's a lot that's relatable and I think in both cases, there's a lot of, Kelsey writes a lot about the religious pressure and the pressure in her family and the ethics and the, feeling she had no say. And I think, when you're young and you're vulnerable and you find yourself in a situation, an unplanned pregnancy, then your choices get limited and get distilled and set the course. And so I could see my story turned out differently, but there's so much that I could relate to through Kelsey's story.
I'm not necessarily expecting an answer. I'm sort of just kind of putting this out as an observation, I guess, is when I see her still a young woman in my mind. Oh, God. This will be the last time I say it. I turned 40 this year. So seeing that and knowing she's in relationship with her child, and like just a couple years down the road, like she's in a position where she could be a parent, and that's tough. That is so tough. And this is what leads me to this observation is I really wish we were working at the upstream problems versus having these, like, again, this feels like a downstream conversation where we're like, it's happening, it's already happened, we're dealing with this, versus setting those mothers up for success in parenting, even in an unexpected spot where they're in,
I agree completely. And so would Kelsey. Feel safe in saying that. I mean, she's in community with a lot of birth moms and doing that in lots of different ways. But that is where it needs to happen. And Kelsey and I both have been talking a lot, and she writes about it in the book too, about informed consent and what that means. And birth parents definitely do not get informed consent. They're not told that, and Kelsey was too. And again, this is where I just want her in the room to say this stuff. But, like we talk a lot about just the complexity of not being told that this will hurt, or you'll be running from the hurt for the rest of your life. There will be guilt involved. Your child will be in pain for potentially the rest of their life. Like that's not that information is not given to them when they're being told they're selfless and doing the right thing and making the right choice, and which, she writes about. So it's really important. And that's where I feel strongly that adoptive parents aren't given that informed consent either. This is just the answer to your infertility, or will help you make the family if it's not fertility related, but not told, again, like I said, like that's why I feel like it's a win when I have people who are coming to me and saying, yeah, I don't think we're going to adopt, like knowing how hard this is, either hard, it would be a hard journey as parents, or it would be really hard on the child, whatever their reason, like that they're able to see this isn't what culture tells us it is.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, last thing before we talk about our recommended resources. There is a section towards the end about talking about some of the things that adoptive parents can do. And I think let's go there. Let's go there. You've mentioned several times power dynamics in our conversation. And well, not me. A friend got into it with an adoptive parent during November and was asking them, well, what are some of the things you're doing to help adoptees? And their answer was highlighting Adoptee Voices and resharing their stories. And this is a conversation on Instagram, where they all are. and so my friend and I were like rolling our eyes at this, being like, okay, that's the least you could do, at the very least. And so what I see concrete things adoptive parents should be doing is like the bare minimum, right? Advocating for original birth certificate access, advocating for mental health supports for adoptees. Like, where is your money going now? Like, right? Do you have thoughts on that? And what do you want to challenge adoptive parents to be doing versus just resharing our Instagram stories?
Yeah, or building platforms. Just building their own platform.
Yes, and making money off how to braid their Black child's hair. No, thank you.
Yeah, I know. There's a part of me that wants to start naming names and taking people down right now.
Well, our listeners know. They know.
We all know. Yeah, we know. We all. Sometimes I'm like, why do I keep them in my feed? Just to but it's my fuel.
Oh, no, I just block them.
I keep a few in there. I really do. I keep them in there for my fuel. Okay, now I got all fired up, Haley. So what?
Okay, boss, the APs.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I do. I got a little nervous. There was one point in, I think you're talking about chapter 21 on supporting adoptee maturation. So I think it's okay. I'm not quizzing you, but I think that's the chapter. And in that chapter, I did feel like I was kind of saying, here's what you have to do, make space for us to grieve. There's kind of the practical in terms of supporting adoptees today. But then I also, I have under one of those points was, and I snuck a whole bunch of things in, but, assuming a leadership role. And I have a lot of stuff under leadership, but one of my sub points under that is don't make everything about you. And, I wrote it and I was like, again, sometimes as I'm writing this stuff, I'm like, as it is when you're on Instagram, you feel so brave when you're writing. And then I'm like, okay, I hope they can handle this because I'm leaving it in, don't take our instincts personally, don't make us responsible for your emotions. Don't expect the adoptee to take care of your emotional needs. Even if they try to do it, don't take advantage, don't overshare our stories, and then overshadow, don't even blast your story because it overshadows our stories. So
you have that memorized, Sarah.
I do. Important to me. Yeah. There, that's my bossing. There's probably more.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah. And I think I've written about this too. Don't go on social media. I mean, come on. Oh, it's so painful. It's so painful. And then even if saying my child gave the permission, they can't give permission. They cannot do that right now. They're children. They understand. It could take 40 years. I'm raising my hand. That's how long it took me to realize the little kind of nodding permission I gave was not permission.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I really appreciated that you even put, you say this overtly in the book, that the adoptees that you talk to for your section are all a bit older and have processed their adoption thoughts. I thought I might bring this up earlier, but I'll say it now. I commented on this viral post of this baby being placed with their new adoptive parents. And this was like had to be at least a month ago, maybe more, maybe like 6 weeks. And I'm still getting replies to me about how stupid I am, because my comment was like, you're looking at this as this beautiful moment, but this is a really traumatic event for the child, right? This means they're losing their connection with their biological family. And so I'm just like, okay. And the ones that really I feel are the adoptees commenting and saying, oh, what are you talking about? What do you know? Because I didn't identify myself as an adoptee in the comment. I love that I'm adopted. This is the happiest moment of this baby's life and all these things. And I was like, oh, okay. I don't think you've examined fully the impact adoption has had on you. And that's fine. That's how nice for you. But I appreciate that you really did talk to folks who have. And I recognize some of the names, some of the people I know, some have been on the show before. And so that was really beautiful. So I really loved your section on adoptees. I learned so much from Kelsey. And I'm going to say, who is this book for, Sara? Who is this book for? Will our listeners benefit from reading this? I think so. I do. I think so. I think there's things that you point out to us as adoptees that could help us in our healing journey, some things that may be unexamined for us. Who do you want to read this book when you're talking to, our listeners here on Adoptees On?
Okay. Well, you mentioned the adoption constellation visual that I made. And I want anybody who sees themselves in that visual of the constellation to read the book. I mean, that is ultimately our audience. When we were writing the book, and again, pay back to you, when you came back and said, "Ooh, I can't read that third question," we really went back and said, "Okay, who are we writing for?" We had to get the clarity. And what we came to is that each of us are writing to our own people. So me to adoptees, Kelsey to birth parents, and Lori to adoptive parents. And we're writing to help. Like for me, I was driven by feeling like I was crazy for the first 40 years of my life, on some level, because I didn't understand all the different ways that adoption affected me. And then becoming a parent, well, so I guess it wasn't quite 40, I exaggerated, but, becoming a parent in my 30s, made me start realizing, I just started waking up and realizing, okay. And then I started studying attachment, and I'm like, oh my God, all the ways I was responding were normal ways humans respond in the face of separation. And I pretty strongly believe there isn't much separation greater than adoption. So, because we face it for our entire lives, it's constant in so many different ways, which I write about in the book. So I wanted to explain us to us. And I wanted to explain us to the people who are constantly not getting us and getting it wrong. The timing was perfect. Again, sometimes triggers are great. I went to a conference, a retreat, and I was at an author table with an author who had a book about, it was totally pathologizing. She was a foster parent, an adoptive parent, both. And she writes books about these raising traumatized children. And I'm like, oh my gosh, the whole thing was pathologizing. And I'm like, I'm tired of that, but it was my fuel. It was my fuel. Like, okay, I'm explaining us to us, and I'm explaining us to that author and every person who read that author's book and all the other people who pathologize us. We don't have reactive attachment disorder. We have a human brain that responds to separation in a certain way. That's what we do. And we aren't crazy. We're doing what our brains do, and we've got too much separation to bear. And so that for me was my driving factor behind the book for the audience. And Kelsey, the same way. Birth parents, sometimes there's, I think it's like for adoptees, it can be so painful to look. As you experience, it's really hard when those adoptees are at that point in their journey, because, we're sitting in a different place now. You're in your 40s, I'm in my 50s, and I keep talking about that too. These milestones are big because you have new perspective. and you don't want to take away where they're at right now. It's part of the journey that we've all been on. And you don't want to shut them down. You don't want to tell them how their journey is going to unfold. That's not right either. But yeah, it's hard. So, and I think that happens for birth parents too, was where I was going with that, is I think that happens to it may not be quite by a year, but it happens for birth parents as well. And so that was Kelsey has talked about wanting to explain that. And I think for Kelsey, she said this a lot, is wanting to show the full, well-rounded 3-dimensional aspect of birth parents to others too. She is not only a birth parent. She's a lot of roles, and she's a human being. She writes a lot and says that a lot. So, and for Lori too, I think there's the less about, because of that whole filtering and unfiltering exercise we went through. But I think for her, she said sometimes adoptive parents don't know that they're doing these things. And she also wanted to help kind of show that they're doing that, how to model thinking beyond certain stereotypes, how to model looking at your own situation only from your angle. Mm-hmm. So, and then of course, we hope that people making policies and looking at what's best for the child will read this and come to some of those same conclusions of, whoa, this goes deeper than we ever knew.
I want to link to a video. You all have a podcast it's available on YouTube, and there's a video that just released pretty recently. If you're listening when this episode is released, it's called Adoption Constellation Roundtable. What is hard about adoption? And I really appreciated the comments from everyone. I think it's a really great discussion that helps add to the conversation you and I've had today. What did you want to recommend to us, Sarah?
It's so hard when that question is so hard. It's so hard. I have so much I want to recommend.
Your first time, you practically tried to recommend my show. I was like, but you're on it. They're already listening.
They're here. I remember struggling with this on that one, and for the other one I did with Donna. I have 2. Can I say 2, or is that cheating? Do I have?
Okay.
Okay, so the one I said when I emailed with you, I said Adoptee Voices easing, but then it felt so self-promoting. But it's not, because it's other adoptees. It's the adoptee writers in my writing group, and I dedicated the book to my portion. Each of the 3 authors of Adoption Unfiltered had a dedication, and mine is dedicated to Adoptee Voices writers. That their stories matter and their voices matter. So, and that's why the easing is so near and dear to my heart. And I like to lift it up and point people to read it whenever they can. Where I'm working on the next issue right now. We've had 11 issues and just some tremendous writing of adoptees. But then the other thing I wanted to highlight is the adoptee consciousness model from Zen Bronco and J-Ron Kim and others. If you're not familiar with it, it's just I'm really loving it. And I just keep returning to it. And I just love that it's a spiral, and it's not, I just like the metaphor in so many ways. And I think, it kind of speaks to how, this work in adoption for all of us, we are all building and growing and getting it better and better. The more we all, all of it adds value. And I like the evolution of kind of going from out of the fog, which I still use sometimes, but I also like the evolution of speaking to adoptee consciousness. Mm-hmm. So much richness there.
Yes. J-Ron Kim was on the show talking about that model in 235, if people want to hear her elucidate on it. And perfect timing. I don't know if you heard that jingling. That is probably the first public jingling of my new puppy. My editor is going to be so happy about all the little puppy noises, but is what it is. Okay. I wanted to say it out loud because you grieved with me for my old puppy, and now you get to see my new puppy in a minute when we're done.
Yeah, you have to. I have to have a viewing.
Yes. Okay, let's do it right now. And then you got to tell people where we can find your books, and where we can connect with you online.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, my heart might melt here. I may have no brain capacity after that. Oh, 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 what a beauty. Oh, I love the bow tie. Oh, big yawn.
If you want to see Spencer, you can go to my personal Instagram to see videos and pictures of him. Okay, Sarah.
That's a setup. That is a setup. I just want to reach through and cuddle him. Yeah, he's on Haley's shoulder here, and it's the sweetest thing ever. Oh, he's going back to sleep.
Yep.
Oh, I love it. I've got a puppy right now too, Haley, and he's at the naughty stage. He's a teenager now. He's 6 months.
There's another naughty stage. Great.
Let's not talk about that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So to find the book, probably the best place to go is adoptionunfiltered.com. That links to our podcast, that links to information about the book, and it's available anywhere. Bookshop.org, Amazon. You can request it through the library, anything. So it's published by Rowman and Littlefield.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Sarah.
Thank you, Haley. I appreciate being back. And I loved having this hard conversation, like talking about it. I'm glad we could do this.
We did it. I so appreciate when friends can have different perspectives on things and we can still get along and do work together. And I mean, Sarah and I both kind of talked about this email and sort of off recording, but I really don't think we have very different perspectives on adoption. I think we both really highly value Adoptee Voices. And I mean, she started a whole thing to help adoptees storytell and write their thoughts and get things onto paper in order to elevate Adoptee Voices, which I think is amazing, incredible. I know so many people that have gone through one or more of their writing cohort groups, and I think it's amazing. But the value I see in folks like Sara who can work with adoptive parents and hopefully coach and lead them to a better understanding of adoptees is enormous, because I don't want to do that. A lot of you don't want to do that either. And so I feel so grateful for someone like Sara who has the patience and the compassion and the patience to deal with some of those ongoing shenanigans. I really appreciate that. And so I think these conversations are really, really good. And they show me some of the areas I still need to grow in, for sure. I love hearing from birth parents because it helps me gain a better understanding of my mother and why she won't have contact with me. And, where can you get that? Where else can you get that? And I've had so many mothers sit with me and be very generous with their stories. And I hope we can do the same for them. And I always like to say adoptive parents are welcome to eavesdrop here. So listen, but we won't be taking questions. Thank you. Anyway, if you were worried that all of a sudden I'm going to start interviewing adoptive parents on the show, no, don't worry about that. Adoptees on, adoptees only. So we're good with that. I want to thank my Patreon supporters for making this show possible. When you are a Patreon supporter, you are paying for the costs of Adoptees On to be produced. Sara has been a Patreon supporter, and I really appreciate everyone who has donated in some fashion towards the production costs of the show. And if you join Patreon, we have levels where we have online events monthly with book clubs and Ask an Adoptee Therapist events, and There are so many good things about being in our community together. It's just really special for me. And we have scholarships available. If you would like to come, you can go to adopteeson.com/scholarship and find out how to apply there. We would love to have you. Thank you so much for listening. Let's talk again next Friday.